My story, said Coretta, is a freedom song from within my soul. It's a guide to discovery, a vision of how even the worst pain and heartaches can be challenged into human monuments, impenetrable and everlasting. And as the song said, I want to walk holy, my calling to fulfill. Please order my steps, and I'll do your blessed will. Amid the multitude of accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., many people are unaware of the role that Coretta Scott King played, the many areas of civil rights that she was engaged in, that even her husband may not have even been known for. So we're going to honor him through her and honor her in her own right. A few weeks ago, Reverend Deanne spoke of the difference between a God calling or idea and a human calling or idea. And I was trying to write notes, and I sent her a text that said, see, people really do listen to what you say. She mentioned that a human idea, although it might be something that's useful or exciting, is one where you can see exactly how you can accomplish it. A God idea feels bigger and feels like it's greater or more imaginable than you could possibly think. Human ideas ask us to leverage the skills and capacities that we already know that we have. God ideas ask us to grow and to become greater, to become the person who can step up, step in, and answer a call. And so I think the story of Coretta Scott King is one of her listening, praying, inquiring about her call, and even pivoting when it seemed like the call was greater, larger, than she could have imagined, but one that she needed to answer. So here's the did you know? Did you know that she ended her last 10 years as a vegan? I never knew that. During the last 10 years of her life, she became a vegan, saying that she felt that it was her very last step in living a nonviolent lifestyle. And are we good? And although she didn't write a book, because I kept thinking, what happened to soul food? There is vegan soul food out there. She was also a fearless advocate of LGBTQ rights, including marriage equality. And it is something that she stepped out on her own, and a lot of people didn't know about that. In fact, when questioned about her position, she said, did you forget that Martin Luther King Jr.'s words were that justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? In 1983, it was she who urged that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 be amended to include gays and lesbians as a protected class. And did you know that she was also a strong advocate for people living with HIV? She was a prominent speaker, not only during the civil rights movement, but was often the only woman who was speaking out on behalf of LGBT rights at the time within the religious sector. So she was also someone who very strongly believed in the anti-war movement. And I want to put this in perspective, because during this time when she was advocating against wars of all kinds and Martin Luther King Jr.'s house was bombed, he wasn't there, she was there. And so in the midst of that fear that she very well could have had that she should not be prominent because her life was in danger, she was out in the forefront. She continued to fight against war. She urged women to join her in rallies. In 1962, she served as the Women's Strike for Peace delegate to a 17-nation disarmament conference in Geneva, Switzerland. And she was an outspoken voice against the death penalty. Morality, she said, is never upheld by legalized murder. So there were places in which Coretta Scott King moved in a place that her husband wasn't even standing at the time. She stood out for the voice that she felt was important, and she advocated for women to do the same. And something that I didn't know, as the world reeled from the death of the 4 children in the bombing at the Birmingham church, I didn't know that it was Coretta Scott King who sung at the funeral. What primed her to do this work? Where did she get this from? Was it from her husband? Was it about her following him around in his work that got her interested in civil rights and justice? Well, let me take you back a little bit. When she was young, Coretta Scott took formal vocal lessons. She loved music. She wanted to be a singer. She learned how to read music, and she played many instruments. By the age of 15, she became the choir director and the pianist of her church's junior choir. So was that her passion, or was that her calling? Well, she wanted to study music, and so she won a scholarship to Antioch College, and it was there that she studied vocal and music education. And it was at Antioch College that she said she felt trained for a role in civil rights. There, she joined the local chapter of the NAACP and the Race Relations and Civil Liberties Committee. She later used her gift of her name and gifted her name to the Antioch College to create the Coretta Scott King Center for Cultural and Intellectual Freedom. So, was it her passion or was it her calling? She had a love of classical music. She actually wanted to become not a gospel singer, but a classical music singer. And so she was a classically trained musician who received a scholarship to and graduated from the New England Conservatory of Music in 1954. She had a passion and a calling before she met Martin Luther King Jr. However, after she married him, she felt called to something greater than she anticipated, and she pivoted. And she used her musical talent to perform in what she called freedom concerts, the proceeds of which were donated to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and funded the work that Martin Luther King Jr. did. There it is. Surprisingly, just days after her husband's assassination in April 1968, days after, she led a march on behalf of sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. Later that same month, she stood in for her husband at an anti-Vietnam War rally in New York. Weeks later, in May 1968, she helped to launch the Poor People's Campaign. And in June of the same year, she started the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. That was within weeks of time after his assassination.
We've come this far again, leaning on our God, trusting in God's holy word. God's will never be end. Oh, gather around, we've come this far again. We've come this far again, leaning on our God, trusting in God's holy word. God's never failed me yet. Oh, gather around, we come this far again.
Amid all of this, the FBI was after her. While raising her 4 children and being under the surveillance of the FBI, she continued steadfast to do this nonviolent work. And isn't it interesting that quotation says the FBI was worried about King, but then later it says the target was not Martin Luther King, but Coretta Scott King. It's like they just couldn't stop. It has been said that she used to proofread many of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, so it's not surprising that in this time she emerged as quite a speaker. In retrospect, it is also not surprising that she went on to push many civil rights issues through legislation that furthered and surpassed the work that Martin Luther King began. Notice in this interview her strength and her use of the words I and we.
To me, that is the continuation of the dream through the political process. As we talk about the movement for social change led by Martin, civil rights, political rights, economic rights. During the middle of the last period, say 68, 1974, almost the middle of the Nixon-Ford administration, the Coalition for Full Employment was initiated. And I happened to be the person to initiate that coalition, with the help, of course, of others. But it was the center that sponsored the first conference in 1974 in June on full employment. And we knew then that there had to be legislation in order to bring about a full employment economy and to provide a job, a decent income for all persons who needed a job. Today we have a bill.
The Humphrey
Hawkins bill. Now that bill has to be passed, and I think it can be, provided the people who believe in democracy, who believe enough in this country that to believe that this country must survive and can survive, will work for the passage of this bill.
But
now,
Mrs. King, what do you say?
The coalition, the same kind of coalition that was formed during the Civil Rights Movement to get the Voting Rights Bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have such a coalition. We have organized coalitions. Murray Finley is my co-chairperson of the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers, and some 70 cities and more than 100 communities. And these are active groups. They don't have the name of full employment. They have all kinds of names, but they are part of our coalition. We are based in Washington, and we are working with others in coalition to get the legislation passed. Now, if we get it passed, it will be as significant, as far-reaching as the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
The King Institute at Stanford said of Coretta Scott King, throughout the 1970s and 80s, Scott King continued to speak publicly and write nationally syndicated columns and began efforts to establish a national holiday in honor of her husband. I didn't know that she was the one who did that. In 1983, she led an effort that brought more than 500,000 demonstrators to Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where King had delivered his I Have a Dream speech. As chairperson of the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Holiday Commission, she successfully formalized plans for the annual celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which began in January of 1986. Also during the 80s, Coretta Scott King reaffirmed her longstanding opposition to South African apartheid, participating in a series of protests in her older age in Washington that prompted nationwide demonstrations against South African racial policies. In 1986, she traveled to South Africa and met with Winnie Mandela. She also remained active in various women's organizations, including the National Organization for Women, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the United Church Women. Was it her passion? Was it her calling? She stepped up. She listened. How can we? Well, she leaves us with this admonition.
A young person struggling to succeed against adversity. As an African American child growing up in the segregated South, I was told one way or another almost every day of my life that I wasn't as good as a white child. When I went to the movies with other black children, we had to sit in the balcony while the white kids got to sit in the better seats below. We had to walk to school while the white children rode in school buses paid for by our parents' taxes. Such messages saying we were inferior were a daily part of our lives. But I was blessed with parents who taught me not to let anyone make me feel like it wasn't good enough. And as my mother told me, you are just as good as anyone else. You get an education and try to be somebody, then you won't have to be kicked around by anybody, and you won't have to depend on anyone for your livelihood, not even a man. Encouraged by my parents, I developed a determination to get the best education I could. I received a scholarship to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and after completing my studies in music and education, I applied for and received a scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, where I studied to become a concert singer. As a result of my upbringing, I had a strong faith in God and in allowing myself to submit to God's will and purpose for my life. And I believe it was God's will and purpose for my life that led me to Boston, where I met Martin Luther King Jr. After we married, we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where my husband had accepted an invitation to be the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Before long, we found ourselves in the middle of the Montgomery bus boycott, and Martin was elected leader of the protest movement. As the boycott continued, I had a growing sense that I was involved in something so much greater than myself, something of profound historic importance. I came to the realization that we had been thrust into the forefront of a movement to liberate oppressed people, not only in Montgomery, but also throughout our country, and this movement had worldwide implications. I felt blessed to have been called to be a part of such a noble and historic cause. After we were successful in desegregating the buses in Montgomery, the nonviolent revolution we launched in Montgomery spread like a prairie fire across the southern states. My husband led nonviolent protest campaigns against racism and segregation in cities across the South, as well as in Chicago, Cleveland, and other cities in the North. During this time, I had 3 more children and participated in movement activities as much as possible. People ask me how was I able to do this and raise 4 children at the same time. I can only reply that when God calls you to a great task, He provides you with the strength to accomplish what He has called you to do. Faith and prayer, family and friends were always available when I needed them. And of course, Martin and I always were there for each other. I learned that when you are willing to make sacrifices for a great cause, you will never be alone because you will have divine companionship and the support of good people. This same faith and cosmic companionship sustained me after my husband was assassinated and gave me the strength to make my contribution to carrying forward his unfinished work. On March 31st, 1968, just 4 days before Martin was assassinated, as it has been said by Dean Baxter, he delivered his last sermon entitled Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution right here in this cathedral. In the sermon, Martin inspired us with his unshakable faith in the triumph of good over evil. And he said, with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair the stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discord of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. And so today, I want to challenge you to make a courageous commitment, not only to achieve personal success, but to use your success to help create this beautiful symphony of brotherhood and sisterhood. And if you embrace this challenge with prayer and faith and determination, you will surely succeed. And the 21st century will become a glorious new age of peace and progress for all humankind. May God bless you all and give you the strength to fulfill your dreams. Thank you.
Lord, please hear my prayer. Keep me safe within your arms. It's your servant bound for glory. Oh, dear Lord, please hear my prayer. Amen.